The following is a presentation of the Mat Talk Podcast Network.
It's time to go on the mat. The Cedar Valley's longest-running radio show devoted entirely to wrestling. Brought to you by Rolling Ford and the National Wrestling Hall of Fame Dan Gable Museum on 1650 The Fan.
Welcome to On the Mat. I am Kyle Klingman of the National Wrestling Hall of Fame Dan Gable Museum, joined by our own Grandpa Daycare, Doug Van Gelder. Doug, great to have you in studio. After 10 years, we need to still remind you, just get up to that microphone.
Well, I was settled in pretty nicely there, but I'm up here now.
You're up there now. Yeah. We want to make sure we get out this message for Clint Fuller. His uncle passed away, and we just wanted to make mention of him. And I appreciate that, Doug, you had made mention of him too, and I'll let you kind of just talk about him and what Clint Fuller had said about him.
Well, Clint said his uncle wrestled for Jessup in high school. Ended up going to the University of Iowa, wrestled down there in 63 and 64. In 1964, he was the third place finisher for the Hawkeyes.
Bill Fuller?
Bill Fuller, yeah.
Yep. So it was an era, pre-Gable era, and Clayson was a big
deal. Was it McCuskey down there then?
McCuskey would have been the coach.
Yeah.
Dave McCuskey, who was the coach of the 1950 team for University of Northern Iowa, then Iowa State Teachers College.
Yep.
So just our thoughts are with him.
Well, yeah, Clint's been a good friend of the museum.
He has.
And he's one of my favorite people.
He's an awesome guy. And
he is.
We're glad to remember Bill Fuller, third place finisher in 1964 for the University of Iowa. And we get a chance here with a full hour on the show today. We have an icon in the sport, three-time NCAA championship coach for the University of Minnesota, coached Minnesota in 2001, the only time that any school has had 10 All-Americans, and that was in 2001 at the University of Iowa. 40-year anniversary of J Robinson intensive camps. We get the man himself on the program for a full hour. J Robinson, welcome to the show.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here, Kyle.
Great to have you on. I mean, 40 years, Jay, of J Robinson intensive camps. I know it wasn't the name early on, but when you hear 40 years, what does that mean to you? How does that resonate, Jay?
I mean, most times I don't even really think about it much. When people start kind of dwelling on it, then you start thinking about it a little bit differently. And then when you add up the days, then it just kind of makes me, oh geez, that's a lot of time. I mean, over 7 years of my life been spent in a dorm with high school kids in the summer at an intensive camp, something like it's over 2,500 days now, 2,540 days, something like that. So it's a while.
Why did you stick with it this long?
I think that a lot of things, as you go through life, things change and you see different advantages or things that you do. And I think that, like most camps with most coaches, it starts out as kind of as a part-time gig to earn a little bit of money and then keep your athletes involved. And then over the course of time, I started seeing the benefits that it gives to young people, and that how much you can impact their life in such a very short period of time, 10, 14, or 28 days. And so I think it's a very positive thing if you can help other people. And so I think that that's pretty much the reason that you go back year after year after year, is that the impact that when you have fathers that have come to camp and now sending their sons, hopefully, to get the same experience. But you feel good about what you do, that you feel that you're making a little bit of a difference.
What's the common theme of the impact that you make when you get feedback, Jay? What kind of feedback do you get about the camp?
Probably the biggest one is that you actually, it's a general statement, is that you changed my life, is that what we do over the course of the time is that over the course of these 40 years, we've kind of connected the dots and we've established what we now call, that my wife Sue named the J7. We've identified 7 different skills that we think that are important to be a wrestler, but also they kind of roll into life. And so when you use these skills, or when you redefine, and we redefine a lot of words for people because they're relative to based upon their experience. So as an example, the first day of every camp, I tell the kids, I have a definition of hard work, and you have a definition, and our definitions are worlds apart. And when you leave here in 10, 14, or 28 days, when I say hard work, you're going to know exactly what I mean.
And take us through maybe the other 7 words that you define, or that you have a definition for, that they might not have the same definition that you have.
Well, if you look at them, is that the first they're called, and we call them here the J7, and that came from my wife Sue. She kind of codified them all. But if you look at them from a pyramid standpoint, is that 6 of the skills are about you. The 7th skill is about helping other ones. And at the base of it, and if you look at a pyramid, at the base of the pyramid, you have to have a foundation, something that holds the whole thing up. And so at the base, the first one is discipline. And then it goes discipline, dedication, sacrifice, hard work, responsibility, accountability, and then the last one is service. So, and the discipline one at the bottom as the foundation is the foundation of all the other ones. And really, it's the foundation of everything in life. And there's only one kind of discipline, and that's self-discipline. So those are the words that we use. And over the course, the first 20 years, I always talked about discipline and dedication, sacrifice, hard work. But in talking about those all the time, the words responsibility and accountability kept coming into the talk. So it was just logical to add them to it. So basically, 6 of the skills are about you. If you look at them like a pyramid: discipline, dedication, sacrifice, hard work, responsibility, accountability. And the 7th skill is service. And we added that about 10 to 12 years ago. I was having a conversation with a good friend, and John Bardis, who runs a big company, and we were talking about the service of helping other people, and we added that, and we added it based upon the theory of, when I talk to wrestlers, is that I look at them as warriors, that they go into a circle and their job is to inflict their will on the other person, but they also have an obligation off the mat to help the less fortunate, and that's the service part. So those are the words that we use here, and they're all skill-based. And so what we try to do is redefine it for those that don't have it, and to add and even make it better if they already have some of those skills.
We are on the mat with J Robinson of J Robinson Intensive Camps, 3-time NCAA championship coach for the University of Minnesota, celebrating 40 years of the J Robinson Intensive Camp system. You went through the 7 words. I'm going to suggest you add an 8th, which we could call humor, especially when you get pranked and people sing happy birthday to you and you aren't ready for it. Take us through what happened there when one of the camp counselors decided to prank you on your birthday.
Oh, well, that was Mike McGivern, who was an All-American at Iowa. When I was there, we were together for a long time. Actually, I've done this for 40 years, and Mike has been with me for 39 years. So we're kind of a dual or a combination. But my birthday is during the 28-day camp. And one day I was walking. I was over in my office, and then I came back to talk to the kids at noon. I opened the door, and the kids, everybody in the whole place, they were just freaking going crazy. They had guys in garbage cans, and they were pushing them across the mat, and they were yelling and screaming and throwing their shirts at everybody. And I mean, it's like my mind was going 100 miles an hour trying to figure out what was going on. And I yelled something very definitive out to everybody, and they just stopped, and they all looked at me. And then they started singing happy birthday. So they got me pretty good.
And when you have those memories like that, I would think those have to be highlight moments. I know that there are times where you make an impact, and you have throughout this, but it has to be fun knowing that there can be a lighter side even in the intensity that you bring with this camp.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things that happen at camp that are funny and they're relative to be funny. I mean, and they can be relative to the work ethic, or they could be relative to a run that kids are on, and that you try and bring the whole scope of things to these young wrestlers in that, yeah, it's hard and it's demanding, but then there's some humor in it. And if you can find the humor when you're going through hard things, then it becomes very important. You can find humor actually, and if coach makes you do push-ups, is that it's just, then it becomes a kind of game between you and the coach that's always kind of in a very positive way influencing you. The same thing happened to me like at Ranger School. And I mean, it was 40-some years ago, but I still remember Sergeant Duncan. And every time he looked at me as I did something wrong, I just started doing push-ups. And then we came to an agreement, right, that he would, no matter what he would do, and they weren't going to hurt me. And it made everything a whole lot more enjoyable. So you try and find the humor within everything that goes, no matter how hard it gets.
Jay, you were the longtime assistant coach at the University of Iowa under Gable from the 77 season to the 84 season, but it's always been my understanding that what was the separation was the intensive camps, that Iowa wanted you to open up the books. You didn't want to do that, and that was part of the reason you left to Minnesota. Did that leave a sour taste in your mouth, and how J Robinson intensive camps eventually got to the point where it is?
Well, what really happened, we had an incident with a kid there, a kid who cut practice. And if you cut practice, you go home. And so the staff guys are given some lenience in what they do. And one of the staff guys gave the kid a break and said, the kid left practice early, and he just said, if it happens again, you'll go home. And then what happened was about 3 or 4 days ago, later, they went to play a soccer game in the morning and they did a second roll call, and they caught the same kid, and they took him out and in essence gave him a choice of either having a workout, and then he chose the workout. And then an article was written in the paper about supposedly the kid having a hard time, and the university wanted to control everything within the camp. They wanted to take back the control of the money. And once you lose the control of the money, you have no control at all. And we went back. They asked me to do a lot of things different, and I agreed to all the things they asked me to, except for the control of the money part, because they had a tendency they were going to do it their way, regardless of what kids do. And they're not really concerned, or weren't really concerned about the right thing, as opposed to they were concerned about the PR part of it. So I was coaching. Gable went to the Olympics, so I was the interim head coach. So this went back and forth for a while, and then I resigned. Actually, I resigned in the middle of the season, and no one knew except Gable and my wife. I resigned in December, and then ran the team the entire time through the national tournament in '84, and then I resigned after that. And so, there's a feeling is that you go through a lot of feelings, and I think the biggest feeling that you end up is disappointment, in that you gave a lot to the university, and my body got beat up a lot, and I had a lot of operations and stuff. And then when it comes on something that's very super trivial, they're not there for you. And that's probably the word I settled. You go through a lot of different words, but a lot of different emotions. The one I settled on probably is disappointment.
Well, in growing up a wrestling fan, the one thing I always heard was that there was a divide between you and Gable, and that you guys may have been at odds. What's the truth behind that?
Well, I mean, basically it was basically what happened at the end is when I decided to leave, Dan wanted me to do some different things, and I wasn't willing to do that, in that I had just given to the university, and at some point in time it was enough, and I wasn't going to do anymore. And you always have a thing of, what do you do, and if people are going to fight for you. And I just didn't feel that anybody at the university, for everything that I gave, was going to fight for me. And I think it was something that was so minor and so ridiculous, the whole thing, even at the time going through it, and they could have easily said, yeah, this is not a problem. This is not a big deal. And nobody did. I mean, and it's one of those things that bother you because you kind of have an account where you think that if you put things into your account, that at some point in time when you need to take out, that there will be something there. And there wasn't anybody in the administration or anything that's going to really fight and help and keep you.
Do you wish you would have handled it differently?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think that I was very upfront with everybody. I don't think it was a big deal. I mean, they made it into something, right? And everybody will say, well, yeah, you know, they're your boss. Yeah, they are. But, you know, loyalty goes both ways. You can't demand loyalty from people, you know, and not come for them when they're there. You know, I was talking to a gentleman who was just in Afghanistan. He's retired, and he runs Gold Star Teen Adventures for teens of soldiers that are killed. And I just was talking to him at the last camp, at the 28-day camp, and he has they're sponsoring kids that's there. And one of the things he said, and he was a special forces guy and he was a ranger guy, in our conversations, one of the things he said is, one of the things that's very comforting about being in those units is you always know that somebody will come to get you, right? And there's a very comforting thought in knowing that. You know, Rangers have a creed that says, leave no man behind. And so you have a tendency to get into situations to where you think when you're out somewhere, someone will come help you. And when they don't, then it bothers you, because what they've asked you to do is they've asked you to do all kinds of things, and you've done everything they've asked. And then when they have to go out of their way, they're not there. So,
Jay, we have to take our first break. We're going to be back with two more segments with J Robinson. He's celebrating 40 years of J Robinson intensive camps. I've seen them often and seen what it does to change lives, and we get a chance to talk with the founder of J Robinson Intensive Camps next on the mat.
24 hours a day, 7 days a week. When all you want is sports, all you need is 1650 The Fan.
We are back on the mat. 1650 The Fan. I'm Kyle Klingman of the National Wrestling Hall of Fame Dan Gable Museum, along with Doug Van Gelder. Our second segment with J Robinson, three-time NCAA championship coach for the University of Minnesota, distinguished member in the National Wrestling Hall of Fame, and celebrating 40-year anniversary of J Robinson Intensive Camps. You were also the longtime assistant coach under Dan Gable. You were there from the 77 season through 1984. And when they had a going away party for Dan at his last year at the University of Iowa in the administration, you were one of the keynote speakers, and you said that it's impossible to describe what it's like to actually wrestle Dan Gable. I know you said it's impossible, but can you do the best possible justice you can to what it's like to wrestle Dan Gable in competition?
Yeah, I think the best thing that as people ask me over the years, it's like wrestling flypaper. Is that he just sticks on you. Is that if you watch most people wrestle, you know, they wrestle, they're in, they're out. You know, they go forward, they take a break. Wrestling with Dan was like you never. The thing that made it incredibly difficult for him to wrestle him both physically and mentally in one role to the other is that he was on you so much that you really never got a chance to kind of regroup. And so that then affected you mentally, is that you never got a chance to reset, to kind of get your thing going. And so he got you going down that road. And when he got you going down that road, it was very hard to get off the road because it started affecting you physically. You start getting a little bit tireder, and then mentally, it then wore on the mental part of it. And it took me a long time took me about a year and a half to really realize what you needed to do to wrestle him to be competitive with him.
In that same speech, you talked about his coaching, and you said Dan Gable was flexible in his coaching. Elaborate on what that means and how Dan Gable was flexible and how he translated that into championships.
I think Dan was flexible in that he looked at all the parts and saw where things would impact other things. Whether he did it with coaches, realizing that he didn't necessarily have some skills that were needed, but brought those to bear if they were needed with the individual, and so it was a situation to where he was very adaptive in looking at what the needs of different athletes were. And it's like everything. There's positives about it and there's negatives about it, because the positives is in some athletes you got more out of them, and the negative is the other athletes actually needed maybe more discipline to get where they were. But I think he balanced it, and when I look back on our time together, I think he balanced it well, because both of us worked really well together. And I've said many times is the things that Dan missed, I caught, and the things that I missed, he caught. And so there was never any kind of fighting or anything about what needed to be done. It was like, a hand in a glove. They just fit so well together.
Now, did you want to stay at Iowa? I've heard that you would have been just content to stay as Dan's assistant coach as long as he was the head wrestling coach. How accurate is that?
It's accurate. I had no desire to ever be a head coach.
Really?
I was happy to be there. I mean, with Dan and I had a very unique and very special relationship, and it was very super positive. He never told me I couldn't do anything. He gave me great flexibility in trying new things, whether it was with Nautilus equipment or visualization, and so I had no real reason to go anywhere. I was happy there. We were raising a family. I laughingly tell people it was when we all got started, we were all young coaches and we all had families and young kids, and it was kind of like, for lack of a better, it's kind of like Camelot. I mean, it was kind of us. We were there with Kurtelmeyer, and then this thing started, and then it was kind of us against everybody, and it kept everybody super close together, and everybody enjoyed being around everybody else. So I had no desire to ever go. I mean, if I hadn't had that deal with the university, I'd have been there and I'd have been done when he was done. So never ever had any real desire when I was there to be a head coach. And afterwards, I just had to get a job. So
we are on the mat with J Robinson, head wrestling coach. Took Minnesota to 3 NCAA championships, and I want to talk about one of those championships. 2001, 10 All-Americans, didn't have one finalist. It's the only time that there's been 10 All-Americans in the history of the Division I NCAA wrestling tournament. But I want you to tell us about that little green sticky note and what you wrote on it and how that transpired into what I just talked about with that championship.
The little green sticky note.
I
still have the little green sticky note. Well, the little green sticky note goes back to, I would say this, is that my favorite saying is, I'm not very smart, okay, but I can take something that other people use and make it work for me. And that Bear Bryant said that. And I look at that and I look around to what other people do, and if I can use it and if it can benefit what I'm doing, I'm a great believer in borrowing from other people. And anyway, in the fall, Kendall Cross came and did our coaches clinic. And after his coaching clinic was over, Kendall talked to our team. And when he talked to our team, he talked about when he was preparing for the Olympic Games, he made a sign and that he put it over his bed. And the bed said, and the sign said, "Get up and train while your opponent is sleeping." And he said, it was the first thing I saw every morning I got up, which reminded me what the day was about, what my goal and my purpose was for the day. And then he said it was the last thing I saw before I went to bed at night, okay, to hold me accountable to do what I should do. So I thought that was a great deal. I thought it was a great idea. So I have a day timer, which I flip every day and go from one thing to the next. And so I wrote in my day timer, I wrote 3 and 0, 10 and NCAA. And every day when I would move to the next page, I would flip that little sticky note in there. And it kind of reminded me what we had to do to try and win the national tournament. Iowa had 4 number 1 guys in the tournament. So when I looked at it from a very logical situation, the only way that we had a chance of winning it would be to have 10 All-Americans. So that's where the 10 came from. The 3 and 0 came from we would beat Iowa in the dual meet, the Big Ten, and the national tournament. And NCAA meant that we would win the NCAA tournament. And I saw those things every day, and they did exactly what Kendall Cross said they would do. They reminded me what I had to do every day, and then they reminded me if I did it. And so it was a very positive experience, and I tell a lot of people about it, and I've done it with other things in my life, and it's worked out pretty well.
Well, you beat Iowa in Iowa City at the University of Iowa, where you were an assistant coach, but it was a roller coaster ride because you had a pretty disastrous semifinal round, and there were some Hawkeye fans that got on you. Take us through the emotional roller coaster of having a terrible round and then coming back around in the consolation and then finally winning it.
Well, yeah, it was really kind of an emotional thing because you have to go back 2 years to 99 when I believe we beat, it was the first year we won the Big Ten, and we beat Iowa. We went to the national tournament. We had a chance to win, and pretty much everything that could go wrong went wrong. So one thing after another, and we ended up losing in 99 by 2 points. And there were so many things in the tournament, just anything. I mean, a couple referees call, a couple flip of the coins. Chad Kraft is in the semifinals. If he wins the flips, he goes down, we win the national tournament. So anyway, we don't win in 99. So in 2001, we're in Iowa City. We have 6 in the semifinals, and all 6 of them lose. I mean, even it comes down to Garrett Lowney, and he's wrestling a kid from Illinois in the semis, and they go into overtime, and they flip the coin, and the coin's rolling around, and it's almost at a 45-degree angle that it's going to fall on heads. And you can just see it. It's falling on heads, which means Lowney's going to get his choice, and at the last minute, it flips over again to the opposite. Okay? So we lose that one too. So now it's like the whole thing's starting all over again. Right? And the Iowa fans, being as lovable fans as they are, right? Which is great. I mean, it's the way it should be.
Right.
Okay. They're going, they're yelling at the top of their lungs. Our fans who have been going back and forth in Carver Hawkeye, they're yelling 0 and 6, 0 and 6, 0 and 6. In essence, telling us, that we sucked that night, okay, and that our guys stumbled and fell short. And they were very proud in doing that. But we went back and we talked to everybody, and we had trained different that year in that what we did is a lot of our training, we went to 3 hard days in a row with the idea of the third day would belong to us no matter what. And so a lot of weeks that we would have 3 hard days in a row instead of having a day or 2 days. And it was all designed for the national tournament. And it was all designed for the last day. And so when we got into that last day, our guys totally believed that it was their day. It was their turn to win. And that's what happened is that within a couple minutes is that when I was watching, Damian Hahn wins a match. Garrett Lowney, I think he throws the guy from Oklahoma, pins him. Owen Ellison reverses the guy and pins him. And Damian wins the tournament. And then he bends over and kind of drives the nail in the coffin, and the tournament's over, and we have 10 All-Americans, and that's it. And we're in Iowa City, and our guys love to wrestle in Iowa City because of the competition. They love it, and instead of fearing it, they went there with an expectation of what they wanted to do, and they had to do some very hard, difficult things, but they became the first team in the history to have an All-American at every weight, and they won the tournament. And the beauty of it is, and I've been pushing the team part of wrestling forever, and the beauty of that team was there were no champions. Okay, is that everybody contributed to that championship trophy. So, and it's what life is about when you're on a team, is that no matter what happens, whether you were third or fourth, fifth, or sixth, it didn't make any difference.
And and your fans had a chant too at the end, right?
Oh yeah, our chants laid in after it was all over and we were getting the trophy. It was back to the eyes. It was 10-0, 10-0, 10-0. Yeah, they didn't have a problem.
Yeah.
They didn't have a problem at all rubbing it into the Hawkeye fans.
Well, hey, what is it? How hard is it when you look back at it? How difficult is it to win an NCAA team championship?
I think it's very difficult. I mean, it's a lot more difficult when you're on a team that is one sub. You take so much for granted, But when you go somewhere and you start all over, the biggest thing is, so when I went to Minnesota, the biggest thing was we were like 34th in the nation the year before. So, I mean, the biggest thing you have to do, and I don't think it's any different than a team championship or a company or anything, is that you have to change, right, the people's mindset, right? That is the biggest thing that you have to do. Is as a guy said, you got to get all the right people on the bus and the wrong people off the bus. That you can't have people on the bus that don't believe what you believe. And then while you're trying to get there, you have to be and I've said this many times, you have to be the keeper of the flame. You have to believe for everybody else, right, to get the thing started. When things aren't going right, everybody's going to look to you. Everybody is going to look to you for guidance and belief that you can get this done. And so it becomes incredibly difficult to, when a lot of things are going wrong, to still hold that belief system. And you can't compromise. Everybody's talking about compromise. But when you compromise, you go down. Okay, you never compromise up. And so you have to believe deep within you that this is what we can do and this will work. And then you have to find the people that believe as you believe and surround yourself with those people.
We're on the mat with J Robinson, 3-time NCAA championship coach for the University of Minnesota. We talked about the 01 championship, and you won it the next year. Repeating is difficult too. How hard was that?
Well, I think it's really hard. I think that every time you win a championship, it's something different, because once you climb the mountain, actually, in a lot of different things, once you got to the mountain, most people relax, and that's when disaster comes in. There's 8 stages kind of a development, and you go to abundance to complacency to apathy, and you have to really guard against that. Is that once you get something, most people forget how hard it was to get it. Right? And you have to constantly remind people that we're not going to get this just because we won last year. Last year is over. It's done. Those books are closed. We have to do it all over again. And some of the same guys are there. So you kind of have to, you have that momentum that first time that kind of carries you. And the second time, I think what you have to do is what I call is you have to artificially create that expectation. You have to make things harder on people and the new people coming in so that they can pay the price. And it's what I call a windshield wiper, is that once you get to abundance, you go to complacency, apathy, and dependence. And the new people coming in, right, they get all the benefits but they've done none of the work to earn those benefits. So you have to artificially make it very difficult for them, so they pay the price, so they understand what it is. And if you can do that, go back and forth. And Gable was very good at doing it. Okay, is always going back and making the people that are coming into the system, right, pay that price. Pay that price. Pay that price.
Jay, we have to take our next break, but we're going to have another full segment with you. We'll be back with more J Robinson. He's celebrating 40 years of J Robinson intensive camps. He'll be back next on the mat.
Log on and listen online at 1650thefan.com, the online home of 1650 The Fan.
We are back on the mat, final segment with J. Paul Robinson. They call him the captain, and he is out in Oregon right now. We're co-hosted with Doug Van Gelder. Had a great couple segments here. We could go on for another probably 4 hours and not even touch everything, but we have a few more minutes here, Jay, as we talk about J. Robinson intensive camps and what you're doing here. 40 years. You're 71 years old. You mentioned that you are still staying in the dorms. You're in Oregon, as we said. What's this like as you have 40 years? I know you don't get too sentimental about it, but it has to be rewarding knowing that you're still continuing to make that impact, even in different states, even at different times.
Well, I mean, I think that one of the things I've told people throughout your life is there's very few times in your life where you can actually change people's lives, that you can impact them and give them a chance. And if you're somewhat successful in life and you found different things that can help people get, in essence, to the top of the mountain, then you kind of have an obligation to help those that aren't there, and especially those that want to know. I mean, not everybody wants to get to the top of the mountain. Not everybody wants to work hard. Not everybody wants those things. But if you can surround yourself with those people and pass on that knowledge, they don't need to, in essence, step on the landmines that you stepped on. Is that your kind of choice or obligation is to guide them through that path. And so that's what I think camp has become, is to share the lessons of life that you've learned that can help you, or that have helped you, the mistakes that you've learned from that people don't need to do, and then to find the kids that really want to be good, and they're willing to listen and they're willing to do what you're saying. And then it's kind of fun being around those people.
What happened with your separation with the University of Minnesota, if you don't mind talking about that a little bit?
Well, when I got fired in September, then I have filed a grievance against the university for a lot of different things. The university broke a lot of their own rules. There are things that they were supposed to do. There were procedures that they were supposed to follow. Then they didn't follow them, and they brought out a narrative that they wanted to say to the public about what happened, and they had a 32-page narrative, and none of it has been verified by anybody. But they came out with this narrative. That's what they've done. And so my only recourse was to file a complaint against the university, of which I had a hearing. We went to about a month ago. There's supposed to be a finding, but I mean, I don't expect to win that finding. You have a university process that's so ridiculous when you think about it, is that you have three university people. You go into a room and you tell your side of the story. They tell their side of the story. They present their facts, right? And they have none of the people in the room that they presented their facts with, so that we can actually cross-examine it and ask them a question. So people that said something, administrators that said something, any of them that were any kind of controversial at all, none of them were at the hearing. So my people, or my lawyers, didn't get a chance to cross-examine anybody on what they said or what was said by these individuals. So it was really basically kind of, I was fascinated that at a major university that their conflict resolution was so ridiculous. I mean, as opposed to having somebody outside counsel do it, but you have to go through this process. So we're just waiting for their what they're going to say here right now. We're waiting for an answer, and then from there we're going to go to the next possible place.
How much longer did you want to keep going coaching anyway?
I mean, I don't know. I mean, it depends upon anything with coaching. You know, I wasn't really ready to leave per se, but it just it leaves a bad taste in your mouth. I mean, you have to work at it. I mean, you have an AD, a guy that I was somewhat happy to see get the AD job, and then you have a university that after 30 years they fire you by text. They don't even give you the simple respect. This is, I go back to that loyalty thing that we talked to begin with, is that I'm driving with a good friend of mine from the service, best friend in the service. I'm driving with him, and I get a call from my daughter saying that I've been fired, right? And the AD saying, well, we tried to get a hold of him, and we sent him in, which is all BS. I mean, the guy I had 2 phone numbers. I mean, they didn't fire me that morning. They knew what they were going to do. They could have easily called me in. So, I mean, it goes back to that loyalty thing of the extreme disappointment in the administration and the way they handle it. I mean, you at least after 30 years have the obligation to sit the person down in front of you and say, hey, this is hard, or this isn't hard, I don't agree with it, or this is what I believe you did. Hey, but they didn't even give me that simple thing of respect after 30 years of working for them. I mean, for me, it's kind of disgusting.
Is it nice, though, to be able to have the outlet of J Robinson Camps and knowing that you have your own system that you get to plug into and carry on and move forward with?
Yeah, I mean, and actually, that is why I did that. Is that in building the camps in the camp system is one of the reasons of building it is I never trusted the university. I never wanted to be so dependent on a university that I wouldn't be able to speak what I thought was the truth. Because most people in the university system don't get a chance to tell what they really feel or they really do because they're worried about their job. And so in building the camp system, I always wanted to have something that I could fall back on without trusting the university. And in essence, I mean, that's pretty much what they teach you to do as a soldier, is that you have an alternate plan, because chances are the original plan will go south somewhere. So, yeah, so in building it, that's what it started out to be. And then over the course of time, the impact on kids and actually changing their lives to where you see these fathers now bringing their sons, 20 years later, because the impact it had on them and changed them is positive, and you feel good about what you do. You feel good that at the end of the summer, you've impacted, 1,500, 1,700 kids in a very positive way.
We are on the mat with J Robinson, 3-time NCAA championship coach for the University of Minnesota. We are celebrating 40 years of J Robinson intensive camps, and over the course of 40 years, just a softball question for you. Give us one memory that stands out for you.
I mean, geez, there's so many different memories, but it's funny as you go and you deal with the kids and how the kids learn and how the parents react to different things. And I mean, one just a couple years ago, we had a kid is that kids can't use their phones. They can't have their phones at practice. They can't have their phones in the dormitory. And a kid had his phone at practice. It got taken away from him, and I took it away from him, and he loses it for a week. And I asked the kid, I said, well, what did your mom say? And he said, well, it's my problem, right? And it's so refreshing when you have parents, right, that look at their kids that they have to learn something. And there's been so many different things. I mean, if I was to sit and then especially get some of the counselors involved and read back and think about some of the things that have happened there's been a lot. And it just, most of them have been super positive. And it's like everything. There's problems, but what my job is to fix problems. And so, as John Colin Paul said, if you don't have problems, you don't have a job. So every year you have problems at camp. You have problems with kids, you have problems with parents, and it's all right. But our job is to fix them, and our job is to give the kids a second chance. There was a guy basically in high school. I did something really stupid. His name was George Benson. He was a dean of students, and he gave me a second chance. And had he not given me a second chance, my whole life would have been different, completely different. And so we believe in second chances a lot of times. So second chances with everybody. Sometimes I'm too lenient, people say. Sometimes I'm too harsh, but you just try and do it on an individual basis. So, that's what camp is. You go to camp and try and help these young people get to a different place in their life.
And you don't see any end to the camps, do you? This is going to go on for a while?
Yeah, no. I mean, we're actually looking at building a leadership system in that as I look at young people today, there's all kinds of leadership camps or workshops, but they're not leadership workshops. Okay, they're individual development workshops. And like Ranger School is one of the best small leadership schools in the world. But teaching leadership and teaching personal development are two different things. So there's different things to do. There's different places to go. There's different things to see. So it's like everything is that when you kind of abruptly leave your job and you're not planning on it, you're not planning. Right? I was probably 2 or 3 years out from what I was planning. So now I got to kind of go back and kind of figure out, what do I want to do on the next stage of my life, because I've only got about 15% of my life left. So I got to figure how I want to use it.
Well, you've used an hour of it with us, Jay, and we appreciate that. We had so much fun with this. We didn't even get a chance to get into you being in Turkey with Wayne Bachman and flipping off the crowd when they hosed you. They took time off, and we didn't even get a chance to get into that, Jay. I mean,
yeah.
Think about all the things we didn't even talk about. I mean, so
it's maybe a good thing we didn't get in there.
Yeah, I mean, getting Munich 72, hearing gunshots. You have so many stories we could have gone into, and just that story hour with Jay. So let's plan on having another time where we bring up some of those stories and chat more about it.
Sounds good, Kyle. Thanks for involving me.
All right, thanks for the time, Jay. That was Jay Robinson, 3-time NCAA championship coach for the University of Minnesota, 40-year anniversary. Doug, some takeaways for you as we have about 3 minutes left in the show.
Well, I saw that, it was kind of shocking to me that Jay said he never wanted to be a head coach. He had been happy down there, but I started reflecting when I was coaching, when we had that in Grundy Center where it was the head coach and the junior high coach and myself.
Yeah.
I never saw myself as anything but
the junior high coach.
Yeah. No, yeah. It was a step up when I went to the junior high.
Oh, right.
I was at the youth program level, and I never even thought about being at a different level.
And that did surprise me, too, with Jay saying that he wanted to be the assistant coach under Gable.
I understood it perfectly.
But I guess what surprises me is because I have the vision of Jay as the head coach and a guy that's a leader and drives things. And so I just see him more as the head coach. So my personal wrestling journey was always Jay was the head wrestling coach at Minnesota.
Sure.
So to think back and go retroactive and say, hey, this was fine for Jay to be part of the Iowa program until Gable retired, kind of surprises me because I just see Jay as that leader and the guy that we were both there 2002 when they set the attendance record at the Target Center in Minnesota. And
he was a few years older than Dan, right?
He was, yep, and still is. Yeah, a few years older, 3 years older in age. And just, it's amazing what he said there, though, the combination, the synergy they had. And I think that's what elevated Iowa wrestling.
Says a lot about Gable, too.
Yeah, because he needed that. He needed the balance. And I think he said it best. Whatever Dan had weaknesses in, Jay covered and vice versa.
Yeah.
And so everything was going to get covered under that staff. And so when you enjoyed Iowa wrestling dominating through the 1980s, Jay Robinson was a huge part of that.
Absolutely.
He was a huge part of that. And I don't think that's a coincidence that in 1986, a couple years after he leaves, Iowa goes on a 4-year drought, championship drought.
Yeah.
And so is it a direct correlation? Maybe, maybe not. But I think when you lose a big piece of that,
you have to consider it.
You do. And then they went 6 for 7 and Gable figured it out. But I think there's a lot to be said for J Robinson's role in that. And a local guy that certainly benefited from that was Brad Penrith, who Gable didn't really want him to come into the program, ripped up the scholarship, and Jay said, no, we're still going to send it to him, and gave him books. So there's a lot of history there. It's great having Jay on for the entire segment.
It was.
As you saw there, we had a lot more that we could have gotten into, but it's been a fun show. We will not have Doug next week. We'll try to replace him the best we can. But for Doug Van Gelder and Jay Robinson, I'm Kyle Klingman. You've been listening to On the Mat.
You've been listening to On the Mat, the Cedar Valley's longest-running radio show devoted entirely to wrestling. Brought to you by Rolling Ford and the National Wrestling Hall of Fame Dan Gable Museum on 1650 The Fan.
This show is part of the Mat Talk Podcast Network. For more wrestling podcasts, head over to MatTalkOnline.com.